scheduling today. So we're going to focus mainly on the rugby, but we will look at some other pieces in the paper. So I will give you your headlines first of all. And it's mostly about Ireland. Sunday Times, Ireland 37-27, I'm sure you know by now. Happy ending. Late Stockdale try secures win over Wales and leaves Ireland only unbeaten side in Six Nations. And then I think very crucially here, Stephen Jones points out Schmidt not worried by injuries to halfbacks. So a kick in the ass, I think, is the colloquial diagnosis for Johnny Sexton. And luckily, I think Conor Murray is okay as well, even though his injury looked quite serious when it first happened. This guy's here is in dreamland territory. Jacob's Cracker is a great headline on the back page of the Mail on Sunday. Ireland on Grand Slam mission as Stockdale seals thrilling win over Wales and Scots stun England. And then that other story by Philip Lanigan, also very interesting. Bookies out as GAA takes stand against all odds. So at Congress yesterday, a 93-7% majority, which is probably some kind of record for the GAA, has banned all sponsorship by a betting company on any competition team, playing gear or facility. That came through at Congress. Star Sports Sunday next. Sterling miss a late fitness test for Raheem Sterling. That cup final underway now. And then it's painful for Johnny. Maybe slightly ungenerous this, considering how well he played, aside from the what they call disaster from the kicking tee. They say star player Johnny Sexton had a disaster in front of the posts. He missed 4 kicks and then limped off injured. But he was rather glorious aside from that. But that's the back page of the Star. The Sun Sport claim an exclusive. They have Mourinho and Pogba. That feud continues, it seems. It's Mike McGrath with the exclusive, and the source that Mike McGrath has says things are at an all-time low at the club, that Pogba's agent Mino Raiola is in talks with Real Madrid already, and that the source says if Paul Pogba is to stay, then he doesn't want Mourinho there. So that's the short version of what's going on at Old Trafford. Back to Jacob Stockdale. Jacob's dream cracker again is the popular headline. Stockdale scorches the Dragons, 21 years old. 8 tries in 7 games is rather ridiculous. Louis van Gaal, Dutchman ready to rescue Chelsea as interim boss. And we know now that Chelsea lost today at Old Trafford, so we'll see if that's likely to happen. Louis van Gaal in the frame to replace Antonio Conte at Chelsea. They have earmarked him as the relationship, it seems, between the club hierarchy and Conte has completely broken down. And then finally, Jacob Stockdale again, front page of the Sunday Independent. A great picture. Ireland's grand plan. Stockdale clincher keeps the dream alive for Schmidt is the front page, and it's a massive picture of Jacob Stockdale there, who Peter O'Reilly, I would say in his quieter moments, is pinching himself thinking, I can't believe this is all actually happening.
Yes, I'd also say he's thanking his lucky stars that he got his timing right and the ball stuck there in the last minute, because from where we were sitting, that was going straight to a 2-on-none, I think. There was and there was probably a run in for somebody, but that's his genius, I think, going forward. Certainly, he's a guy who knows when to be or where to be at the right, or when to be in the right place. And he's had a couple of difficult moments which were pointed out in the coverage. I suppose he got a little bit lost for the first Welsh try, and there's times in defence when he's had the odd difficulty. But I think the thing that one of the main themes, I suppose, from yesterday was the fact that you've got a number of rookies coming into this team and picking up the system and being completely comfortable with it. And when you consider that Ireland had a rookie in the front row, the second row, and the back row, one in each row of the 3 rows of the scrum, that all seemed comfortable and all. I mean, it was interesting. Even Neil Francis in the Sunday Independent, for the first time in living memory, Frano actually manages to say something nice about another second row. He talks about James Ryan. He said it was a strength-sapping game where Ryan's engine, his footballing nous, and his dependability shone through. And this is a guy with only a handful of caps.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. We were talking about Joe Schmidt after the game on camera and how he looked unhappy. He wasn't glowing, because he could see the various things that needed fixing, particularly in defence. But my God, there were so many good things about yesterday for a squad moving forward towards a World Cup.
Yeah, Some other points Frano makes in his piece there in the Sunday Independent. He says there was legitimacy in the question as to whether Ireland could overcome the loss of some key personnel, but we should not have worried. The system can cope without even its better players. Ireland won because intelligence trumped belligerence. And he said as well of the Irish tactics in defence, because I know in the TV coverage the lads picked that out as well, that sometimes it can be a bit tiresome when they're just one-off runners and you think, well, what's going on here? And Frano gives, I think, a very fair interpretation. He says some of their tactics while retaining possession, this is the Irish tactics, were tiresome and didactic. But there is method in Schmidt's madness, and opposing teams have to be very patient and disciplined to hold Ireland legally. And he mentions the fact that Wales conceded only 2 penalties in Twickenham a couple of weeks ago, conceded 9 yesterday, more born out of frustration than indiscipline, and a lot of it was down to Ireland's excellence on the floor. So, you know, in some respects, even just having the ball, even if we're not doing something remarkable with it, there is a method in that madness. We bemoan our football team for not keeping the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the other team, it's a simple premise. The other team can't score when you got the ball. Ireland have tried this against Wales in the last couple of years, and it hasn't really come off for them. You remember those long sets of phases under the post at the Millennium Stadium 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when Wales just held out. Sean Edwards' defensive line just was just, you know, relentless, and Ireland probably didn't spot the gaps. But I think what was different yesterday, Joe Schmidt has pointed out that Wales are a smaller team now, that they've gone with a more mobile, athletic kind of backline player in particular.
Yeah.
And Ireland won the collisions all over the place, and even the new guys who stepped in were, like, you know, Chris Farrell from the off, from this first contact was dominant, and I think it took it out of them, but they had enough cushion, and they should have had more cushion had Sexton kicked his goals to ride it out, because I thought they ran out of steam a little in the last quarter, because probably their bench isn't as strong because of the players they've lost, and the depth isn't quite there yet. But I mean, to lose the players that Ireland lost and still come up with that performance was just a credit to the coaching staff and the discipline and the kind of the game plan that they're able to put together, because, you know, you lose 3 important players and the players step in and do so well. It's very, very impressive.
Isn't it interesting that even as the lines were dropping off the Irish team across the last 10 days and Wales were regathering some lines, that such is the faith everybody has in Joe Schmidt, that the common refrain was, well, I don't quite know how he's going to do it, but he'll find a way to get this done and we'll be just fine.
Yeah, a lot of it was really common sense. I mean, we had Warren Gatland afterwards kind of poking fun with a bit of sarkiness in the press conference, talking about how brilliant Ireland had played in attack, how brilliantly they had played, how exciting they were.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was sarcasm.
Without doubt.
100%.
Oh, he burst out laughing afterwards, so he couldn't contain himself.
Okay, so and when Warren Gatland was saying, I'm sorry if I upset Joe in recent years with comments I've made about the team.
Tongue in cheek.
Okay.
Firmly in cheek, yeah. But there's a couple of things you'd say to that. Ireland spent the guts of what seemed like a decade playing against this massive Welsh backline during the Jamie Roberts era. Yesterday, Ireland go into a game where they have the biggest centres that they've ever had together on a rugby pitch. 6'4", 17 stone, 6'1", 2", probably the same weight. So you use what weapons are available to you. Yeah. And Ireland also, there's an interesting stat, they had scored only 2 tries over the course of 3 Six Nations games against Wales going into yesterday. Yesterday they scored 5 tries, so you can't really argue with that, even if there was only maybe 1 or maybe 2 passes involved in most of those tries.
Yeah.
The quality of the passing and the quality of the lines of running, and then the simple power. And like rugby, when it boils down, it's a scrap, it's a battle, and that will have given Ireland huge enjoyment to have beaten Wales up yesterday, because that's really what happened.
Because you said in your match report, Peter, in the Sunday Times, Ireland scored 5 tries and yet will be accused of being blunt and lacking imagination in attack, as if they will care a jot. But it's that interesting thing, 5 tries, a bonus point was not even being talked about during the week, and yet they're open to the accusation of lacking imagination.
Yeah, and I do think they would be open to that accusation if they tried the same tactics against England and Twickenham. I think they should try the same thing with a little bit of tweaking here and there against Scotland. You don't want to play fast and loose against Scotland. That's playing into their hands. But against England in Twickenham, where you're looking at probably a bigger physical opponent, you're going to have to come up with something else. But I think what annoys Joe Schmidt about this sort of criticism is that it misses the subtleties in the plan. It misses the little things that he has spotted in his video analysis. It misses the the way that they opened Wales up from deep, putting Keith Earls through the middle. They played some fantastic rugby in the first half, and Sexton was at the heart of it at a time when he was missing his kicks. He still had the balls to keep playing, and it's just when Ireland get into the opposition 22, that's when they say, well, we are big enough and strong enough to do it by playing simple battering rugby, and if it works, then it's fully vindicated.
Because I think it was for the Aki try eventually, or else it was for Stockdale's first one. But there was a reasonably, I think it was the Aki try actually. There was a prolonged enough period in the 22 in the build up to that. I mean, and the funniest aspect of the whole thing is Keith Earls on the touchline just waving, and it must cross his mind, I might as well just be pissing in the wind here. This ball ain't coming near me.
Well, I mean, you can say that, but Johnny did call for the ball and whip it out to Jacob Stockdale in the first couple of minutes. So
he did there, but
you got to be ready. But
the Earls turn I'm talking about, I mean, it really was one.
Well, their default position is to go tight, and I think that was definitely the game plan yesterday.
Do you have any problems with that?
Not if they win. I mean, I think you have to be a little bit concerned that against the best teams, you have to have more up your sleeve. But if you go out and score 5 tries against a defence like Wales, who've struggled against in the past, I don't think you can really complain about Ireland's attacking game. Wales was prettier, but they only got 3 tries and came out on the wrong side of it. So Gatland even admitted that later on when he was chatting to us afterwards, and he would say, for all that they played the nicer looking rugby, the more attractive rugby, their attacking shape was excellent when they finally got going with it. It's not worth the jot to him now. He didn't even get a losing bonus point out of the game, and their championship is over. So I think Ireland have the capacity to play it another way. They're not as good as they could be, but they didn't need it yesterday, and they knew that raw power game that would get them over the line, and it worked, and more power to them.
Because Peter, you say it was the biggest centre partnership we've had in our history, really, and you've said it already here, but it put them in a position to do to Wales what had been done to them in the Jamie Roberts era. Chris Farrell gave one of the great Six Nations debut performances, and Bernard Jackman picks up on the physicality theme as well in his piece in the Sunday Independent, and talked about Porter coming through and Stockdale coming through and Ryan, who were able to dominate their opponents in the collision despite being very young. So are we now a very physical side against any team? I mean, we physically right up there as a country.
Well, what's interesting is that you have the kids coming in and playing a physical game. The 22, 23-year-olds coming in and bossing their opponents. If I may refer to a couple of things in the Sunday Times, in my own paper, there were actually a couple of memorable images from David Walsh on this, slightly incongruous, perhaps. You be the judge, but he's talking about James Ryan here, and he says that last night in Limerick, O'Connell was probably... So he's talking about Paul O'Connell and how he was indispensable for so long. He said last night in Limerick, O'Connell was probably humming that old Eagles line, "They will never forget you till somebody new comes along." The whole idea of Paul O'Connell humming any Eagles tune, I find a little bit hard to take. And then also he's talking about Andrew Porter, whose dad he remembers playing, and he's talking about how difficult it is to switch from loose to tight, which Andrew Porter has spoken about eloquently enough himself. But he says that the switch was made, and through the past few months you could imagine the nappies under his shorts when he packed down on the tight side, which is again another interesting image.
It's one I could have done without.
Okay, there you go. But I think on the subject of images, though, I think it's important occasionally to look at the images that are used in the print media, because this is the photograph on page 2 and across page 3. I don't know if you can...
I'll hold it up to camera and you can describe it, because there are radio listeners, obviously. Believe it or not, we're still still going out on that thing called the radio. But I'll hold it up and you can describe it.
Well, yeah, I just think that the print media allows you to have this sort of an image across two broadsheet pages. It's the first thing that the reader is going to see when he opens up, and it is just a fantastic image. It's in terms of the expressions on the faces just after Cian Helio has gone over. Also, though, the pictorial composition is brilliant. You've got 3 arms with the index finger raised aloft. There's a really strong sort of triangular composition going on here. If you wanted to be really pretentious, you could say it would remind you of that famous photograph from the Second World War where they're raising the US flag at
Iwo
Iwo Jima. It's just a fantastic photograph, and Niall Carson is the guy who took it, and I think it's important occasionally to give the snappers their due.
I think it's very true, because there are times where I'm off of a weekday and I'm going to go to coffee shop and put the feet up, and will I buy a paper or will I just read Rory's work for free online? Crosses my mind.
Shame on you.
Well, like you probably.
It's there. I mean, I might have to look at some ads. And actually, what might sway you is it is still a pleasurable experience to feel the paper and actually thumb through the pictures in a nice, relaxed way, nicely laid out with a bit of thought behind it.
No pop-up ads.
No pop-up ads is good too, but because the pictures online are never going to be that experience which your paper can still give you. Now, maybe we're a dying breed here, and this is the kind of thing, there are children listening who don't understand what we're talking about, but I think it's very important. We rarely mention photography in the Sunday Paper Review, and actually a good photo can sell a paper.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the things that this is obviously it's a reportage photograph, but it's one of the things that's enjoyable in our job is that if you're going to do an interview with somebody, you'll often get the photographer ringing you up beforehand, trying to find out if you have a specific angle, something that you're going to talk to the player about, because then that might inform their choice of location. And you know that the players also enjoy working with photographers who've put a bit of work into the preparation, and also, you know, they enjoy the final product as well. So I don't think it's just journalists and snappers who.
I agree with that totally on the player point, and I think it's something we in the media underestimate, whereby I think if you ring a player, and I think young journalists are afraid to do it, actually. They don't want to put the player out. They don't want to in any way do anything which might make them think, oh, I don't want to, you know, they'll say no, or they'll shut down the interview. Actually, if you put yourself in a player's position and say you get a call from a journalist saying, and I've got a photographer, we want to make this really good. We're going to do it here, and this is why, and the photo will really work, and it'll be worth your time, and you'll be part of something that looks really well. I think then as a player, you're far more likely to give a good interview. Whereas if you feel like this is a slapdash thing, you're not going to reveal stuff about yourself willingly. You're going to do a fairly standard, next game that counts kind of an interview. I actually think we should push them more to do good stuff, and I think we'll get better interviews in return.
Yeah, I think with a lot of the top players whose time might be extra precious, they do like the idea of the photographer having done a bit of preparation so that they can walk in, take the photograph, and not necessarily spend their whole afternoon. But then occasionally, you know, you get some guys, some players who are just so willing and so engaged on the whole thing. The one guy I remember in particular was Justin Harrison, a former Wallaby lock, who spent some time at Ulster, and he was willing to pose wearing a straitjacket, standing at the edge of a pier, in a harbour. You know, he was actually enjoying it perhaps too much. but Donncha O'Callaghan, funnily enough, another guy who has been involved in the media now as well.
Yeah.
Just very very happy to do it, and probably find the whole experience more worthwhile, and because of that.
The current players are just living their lives through photos anyway. I mean, all you have to do is follow a couple of them on Instagram, and they, like, if you want to know what's going on in the Ireland camp, go on Instagram, because they're all tweeting, slagging each other. There's often more personality in that than there is sometimes in the post match exchanges. So they're probably more comfortable with a camera than they are with a microphone put in front of them.
It's definitely the biggest insight into Bundy Aki's life. Like when Pat Lam left Connacht, he did the angry faces, and then he had fluid being removed, which was then deleted.
That didn't last long, and I don't think he'll be doing that again. He put up that's the kind of stuff that they hate getting out. So but this is the thing, these players are all very comfortable with so many aspects of their lives being out there in social media, and yet then when they go into Carton House, it's all compressed a little bit, and it's all very serious. So it's an interesting dynamic. Yeah,
I'll just break off for 1 second, because there has been a goal in the Carabao Cup final. Joe Townsend is there.
It's Manchester City 1, Arsenal 0. A straight ball up the middle of the pitch from Manchester City. Arsenal appealing for a foul by Sergio Aguero after a slight nudge on Shkodran Mustafi. Nothing given, and as cool as you like, Aguero just touches the ball over the head of David Ospina. His 30th goal of the season. City 1, Arsenal 0.
There we are, 28 minutes on the clock. We'll take a short break. More from Rory and Peter in just a second. There's a few more rugby pieces to touch on. And elsewhere in the papers, Ian Wright's done a very good interview, and a few more bits besides, which we'll get to in a few moments.
Off the Ball on News Talk, in association with the Air Sport app, allowing you to cast your favourite sporting action from your tablet or mobile phone straight to your TV.
Every year, local enterprise offices support thousands of people to start and grow their own businesses. And this year, our Local Enterprise Week offers more help than ever, running from March 4th to 9th at local enterprise offices around the country. Local Enterprise Week features over 300 workshops, clinics and seminars. Find out about trading online, social media, sourcing finance, starting and growing a business, data protection, Brexit advice and more. Local Enterprise Week, March 4th to 9th. See localenterprise.ie for details. Funded by the Government of Ireland.
At Bruce Betting, we're celebrating 40 years as one of Ireland's leading bookmakers with the launch of our brand new website and iOS app. Packed with features and easy to use, the new Bruce Betting app includes ACCA insurance, cash out and live casino. Bruce Betting, giving you more. In store, online and now on your phone. Please gamble responsibly.
Ask me all you like. I'm saying nothing.
Okay, wise guy. If I apply for an Avantcard credit card, how much interest will I pay on purchases for 3 months, balance transfers for 8 months, and money transfers for 9 months?
I'm telling you, nothing.
Like 0%? I'll apply at avantcard.ie today. Limited time offer, new customers only. Lending criteria, terms and conditions apply. Monthly repayments required. Standard variable rate of 16.8%. Typical APR 22.9% includes government stamp duty of €30. Assuming credit limit of €1,500 repaid in equal instalments over 12 months, total amount repayable is €1,636.50. Total cost of credit of €136.50. Avantcard DAC trading as Avantcard is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Okay, everybody, if you look, here comes another batch of local oats that we'll expertly turn into Flahaven's rich and creamy tasting porridge. How do we do it? Well, and steam. And that's unique to Flahaven's. So, on a Thursday, I think the dinosaurs, we don't even let them in. And that's how it's done. Simple as that, really.
Flahaven's, not your run-of-the-mill oats.
One look is all it takes, especially when it costs from €320 a month. Take advantage of 0% APR finance on the Jaguar, XE and XF sports saloons, or you can avail of a €6,000 purchase contribution. Plus, a complimentary business pack worth up to €3,000. And with a free 3-year service plan, your new Jaguar is more affordable than ever. Stand out from the crowd. Book your test drive at jaguar.ie. Lending criteria conditions apply. Minimum deposit 10%. This is a hire purchase agreement provided by Bank of Ireland. Trading is Bank of Ireland Finance.
Cirque du Soleil returns to Ireland with a brand new show, OVO, at 3 Arena Dublin, October 10th to 14th. Discover a world of insects teeming with amazement, joy, and unstoppable energy. Cirque du Soleil, OVO, at 3 Arena Dublin. Tickets from $40.05, on sale now. Additional charges may apply. Official sponsor, Skoda.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Welcome back. So we're reviewing the Sunday papers. Manchester City 1-0 up on Arsenal. We have Peter O'Reilly from the Sunday Times and Roy O'Connor from the Irish Independent here in studio. Interestingly, we finished up on Andrew Porter in nappies just before the ad break, and Bernard Jackman used that phrase of converting to tight head from loose head, that it is as difficult as trying to learn to write with your non-writing hand, which was a good, accessible way of putting it.
Yeah, I think you get a decent picture of Andrew Porter from, if you read David Walsh's piece that Peter referenced, and then Bernard, about how he's, even coming out of school, he's already broken a couple of Olympic lifts records in the Leinster changing room. He came out an absolute tank from St Andrews due to the work he's been putting in since he was a teenager. I was sitting beside Neil Francis yesterday, and Frano played against his dad Ernie, and he played with James Ryan's dad, Mark Ryan. And Ernie, I think, was a big squat centre, wasn't he? He powerful runner. So Andrew has inherited those qualities, but also has built up a strength. I can't remember the name of the strength and conditioning coach in St Andrews, but he's done a lot of work with Andrew Porter and Jordan Larmour. David Jones, that's the guy. I did a profile of Larmour a couple of weeks ago, and his name cropped up. And Porter's one of these kids, comes out of school ready to go, and for all that his technique probably needs to improve on the tight head side, he has the raw physical strength to get by. It's pretty incredible.
There was a brilliant stat actually, and it was on the ESPN Scrum website yesterday at the end of the game. I just checked out to see how many times he had carried, because Tyke Furlong might seem like the norm for tight head props, but in the old days, all you did was scrummage. Like if you talked to Mike Ross, if he ever touched the ball, it was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen. And if you were listening, on the web or the ref mic, you could only hear the shock, when the ball came to Mike Ross by mistake, because you're scrummaging against two as a tight. I think you've been in the front row, Rúaidhrí,
yeah. Unfortunately,
as tight head is scrummaging against two. So the idea of coming up from a scrum and getting your hands on the ball in the next 10 seconds doesn't make any aerobic sense at all. Okay. So, but he carried the ball 10 times for a grand total meterage of 1.
Okay.
But the point is, he kept turning up. And he never lost the ball. He never turned the ball.
Every one of those carries would have been a hard carry. He wasn't out in the wide channels throwing. He would have been, and he just thought like.
I think he might have registered with quite a few people was running over Stockdale at the RDS over Christmas.
Yes.
So I mean, he has meters in him.
Oh yeah, he's outrageous, and that will come. And he was very good against Italy in that regard. That will come the more he gets comfortable with the scrummaging, because the scrummaging takes so much out of you. But the more comfortable you're going to get, the more you're going to be able to do the dynamic stuff.
One last piece from the game yesterday, and Bernard Jackman can kick us off. Johnny Sexton, he says his general game was exceptional.
Yeah.
And Matt Williams yesterday said he was the best player on the pitch by a distance, even with the kicking issues. He's getting 8s and 9s out of 10 in the papers. You obviously know him well. Well, okay, I'll rephrase that. You worked with him on his diary post lines in 2013, which again I had cause to read because we had him at a roadshow before the most recent lines during the summer, and I reread it. This book has gone under the radar. It is the most honest rugby book.
Reprint.
Honestly, I mean, if you could swing him to do an updated version. I mean, he quipped on that night in the Mansion House last summer when I brought it up. He said, "Yeah, a few people think I was too honest in that book, but it's really brilliant. Like, it's well worth a read. If anyone sees it, it's really is worth picking up because he's unbelievably honest in it, and unbelievably impressive, and just details his preparation and how he goes about his business." Like, he's increasingly my favourite sports person, I think, Johnny Sexton. He is just a brilliant character in every way.
Fascinating, yeah, he's fascinating. And I know from dealing with him for that book that he won't have slept, he won't have gone to sleep very early last night, because he will have played the entire game through his head, lying in bed, even if he is in bed. I think the thing that he used to do is he used to watch lots of episodes of the really popular fantasy. It'll come back to me, but Game of Thrones. He's a Game of Thrones fiend, but most of the time he's going through every play, and he's got something like a photographic memory. And my suspicion is that for all the denials pre-match, that he did carry some sort of a knock into the game, and it wouldn't surprise me if that affected him, his place kicking,
because it was uncharacteristically bad.
Yeah,
I know he's had wobbles before.
Yeah, well, sometimes you still get a little bit nervous on his behalf if the first penalty is on the 15-metre line to the right of the post, because that brings us all back to 2013 and the All Blacks. But I just think that I think it's a real tribute to his mental strength to have carried on playing so precisely, and to be so assured in everything that he did, knowing that those 3 missed kicks were all of them, well, certainly 2 of them were very gettable. Those sort of things would, they would distract mere mortals.
Sure, yeah, and it must be hard to feel like you have almost the moral authority to be in charge of everyone when you're not holding up your end of the bargain. It's how it must feel, rightly or wrongly. And yet exceptional is the word everybody used. It's been a really lovely insight for me to get to watch games with hundreds of internationals beside me and watch them call stuff mid-play. It's an education. And like Shane Horgan, and he said it on air as well, so I'm not betraying any confidence, but he said, like, more than anyone, when Johnny has the ball in his hands and he's flat and up against the defence, it's like you can feel the intelligence emanating from his head. He's calculating so much. It's more than anyone. Yeah. There's like an intensity that goes up a few levels when he gets the ball in his hand and starts moving, and he's the most intelligent player going, really.
Yeah,
and has the skill set to execute as well.
He was superb, and I just double checked. You gave him an 8 yesterday, but that was one of the hardest player ratings I've ever had to do, because he's exceptional, but he almost cost Ireland the game, and he'll be beating himself up about that. But like, I wonder, I don't know, like Joe Schmidt obviously is managing him a long time. I don't know, is Johnny the type that would take an arm around the shoulder well, but like you got to focus on the positives sometimes and how good he was in every other facet of the game. You know, he obviously, I'm sure the kicking played a part in that decision to tap and go. Joe Schmidt said he backed him 100% and then deconstructed the reasons why he shouldn't have done it.
Yes. He did say that Sexton said at half time
they turned their backs.
That the Welsh are turning their backs, so everyone be alive to it.
He almost got there. And for a guy who's obviously struggling with some sort of a glute or hamstring issue, he threw himself to a hell of a lot of contact as well. He was like he just gets so involved in these games. He's like Conor Murray is probably one of the most complete players in the world, but Sexton's, the two of them are just so good at so many different facets of the game. I think we're short of Johnny jumping up in the line out just yet, but you know, for Murray even to take over the kicking, I mean, if he has a hip or he has a glute problem that's going to trouble him at all, it looks like Conor Murray can do this.
Well, Sinead Kassan tweeted I'm sure you guys were pitched, or you wouldn't have been pitched side, I suppose.
We were up in the gods.
Yeah, Sinead Kassan tweeted a photo or video today of Murray kicking from about 45 metres in the Stade de France in the warm-up. Yeah. So there's obviously on their mind.
He's been doing that in warm-ups for last 5-6 years. I think he kind of went back to it. He used to do it for Gary Owen, did it a bit in school, but that's been noticeable in all the warm-ups, and I think he's been waiting for someone to just kind of actually give him a shot.
He's a lovely languid striker of the ball, but they must worry about Johnny going the distance because of the way, as you say, that he played. I mean, if you go back through the tape of the game, there's one stage where Ireland have a line out in the Welsh corner and it gets picked off by Shingler, I think, and it goes behind their own line, but it's Sexton who's running through, smashing Moriarty to make sure it's a 5 metre scrum. When Dan Levy goes over, it's Rory Best and Johnny Sexton coming in, but smashing people out of the way. So I'd say there's times when Schmidt's watching between the cracks in his fingers.
Don't do it, Johnny. Said that before, how much is Conor Murray worth in the French market now, though, by the way? He's now got goal kicking to his thing. I mean, post-World Cup, he'll if he wants to, he can make an awful lot of money.
Why would you have to bring the conversation down like that? Why would you do that? How did you find Sexton to work with? And in my limited dealings with him, which was mainly around that road show last year, shy in a very likeable way, humble, no nonsense, again in a very likeable way. So how did you find his character? I know it's a couple of years ago now, but you see him from time to time.
Yeah. He's a pleasure to deal with because he's ultra professional, but he can't help himself also but be honest. He's a very he's got a very strong sense of right and wrong, a strong moral sense, and so if he says something, if he comes out with some sort of a platitude or something that has been, maybe he's trying to avoid saying something that's too honest. If you poke him once, that's usually enough.
The resistance breaks, yeah.
Yeah, but he's thoughtful. He's a thoughtful guy as well. Very perceptive about people, which kind of goes against the idea that he's a bit low on emotional intelligence because he's always barking at people. He's just doing his job. I can perfectly understand that the French wouldn't have got him, and that he wouldn't have got the French. Because he is true to himself, so he wouldn't bend to accommodate them. So that's I suppose his genius, is absolutely true to himself, and it just happens that he's just on the same wavelength as Joe Schmidt. So they're a perfect sort of pair, if you like.
We'll move on to England-Scotland coverage before we go to the other stories. Just one last point. Are we calling this Lansdowne Road or the Aviva Stadium, or where are we on this whole? Did Joe Schmidt do a daily briefing?
No, he did not. No, he didn't. Warren Gatland did, so there'll be lots of Warren quotes in tomorrow's paper.
Okay. And is that at a dead end? Is that likely to soften that situation? Or
I think that's gone. Whatever about the relations being worked on, I think the huddle itself as an idea at the moment for this third tournament anyway is probably gone.
What are your thoughts on the whole dynamic at the moment, Peter?
Well, I really can't speak for the daily journalists, who are the guys who are affected by it. My own sort of the Sunday's working environment is pretty much as it has been. It's a long way from when I started off, and if you wanted to talk to a player, you rang him up or you got his number somehow. So access is going to continue to be an issue, and it's I can understand that access and the time that the players spend with the media is an issue for someone like Joe Schmidt, who wants to maximise his time. And there's also the aspect of the fact that the IRFU want to use their platforms and use these players as their assets and all that sort of thing. But there's no reason why the mainstream media can't be engaged in the same way, because it's the punters who are reading the newspapers, and they can the two can work side by side, you would hope, and that hopefully relations will continue to be productive.
I feel like you've been very diplomatic there and measured. So England, Scotland then, before we leave the rugby, any pieces catch your eyes?
Well, I just saw Mick Cleary had a good intro, and the match report is often maligned in here of a Sunday in here. Yeah. So,
well, do you know what though? It's interesting. Very few people seem to come in and say they read the match reports.
Yeah,
I'm looking at someone who wrote one yesterday, and I did read it for our conversation. But it's a noticeable trend, particularly non-print people.
No, I think so, and I think a paper dominated by match reports, of games that were on television yesterday are often lost. But I just thought Mick had a kind of a colourful one here saying, "Never mind the Siberian beast from the east weather that is headed this way. Scotland managed to send a deep chill into the marrow of English rugby with an all-encompassing victory that puts England's defence of their Six Nations title into cold storage." I just thought it was nicely summed up. Yeah. But I thought probably more pertinently, Stuart Barnes has had a bit of a go at Eddie Jones and the style of rugby, anti-rugby he's talking about, and the he describes Gregor Townsend and Finn Russell, whose passing was just exceptional yesterday, after a couple of weeks of real heavy criticism. He describes him as a tartan matador with the English bull angry snorting and not getting very far. It was interesting, probably particularly in the wake of Joe Schmidt kind of railing against criticism of his own style of play. The market leaders getting over the coals by one of the most prominent pundits in the English game. I have a lot of time for Stuart Barnes. I think he's really excellent, and it's a good piece, and it's interesting to see two defeats in 3 seasons, but Eddie's not escaping a bit of wrath, which is interesting. And
and I have the sense that people are kind of lining up. They were waiting for this defeat almost. There's something about Eddie Jones that rubs people up the wrong way.
So it's more about Jones and his persona, as opposed to them not liking the style of English rugby over the last 25 games and waiting for it to fail. It's about Jones, not so much the rugby.
Well, I think in Stuart Barnes' case, it probably would be about the rugby. But
does every side think their own side is playing dull, unimaginative rugby? Like, do we need to put away the videos of the Welsh in the 1970s here and be realistic about professionalism?
I think there's probably a little bit of, say, teams watching the Scarlets and Leinster and the way they go about things, and then wanting their national sides to play the same way, which possibly isn't
against better teams.
A test match rugby, it's just a tighter atmosphere. There's not much space. It's much harder to do. You've less time with the players. We asked Stuart Lancaster about this recently, and he said it's just you just don't have the window to he's there with those Leinster players every day working on this system, whereas Joe Schmidt gets his hands on them. Like, imagine what Joe Schmidt could do with this team if he had them every day, and that's why they usually look much better towards the end of a window than they do at the start. So
but Barnes isn't impressed with the
Barnes. He gives out about Eddie Jones' philosophy of telling the world that resilience and toughness trump the style. The style is frippery, I think is the word that he uses, which is not one I'm familiar with, but it's interesting. I think you get away with it when you're winning, but if you're winning ugly, Ireland won a Grand Slam in 2009 winning very ugly, but nobody really remembers that anymore. It's all the glory days, whereas the DVD this year is going to be pretty spectacular with all the late finishes. True.
What's your read on England's rugby, Peter, and also Jones?
Well, I think it's there's something about the coverage and the presentation of English national sporting teams, which it's common to football as well as to cricket as to rugby, is that once there's a degree of success, and the coverage and the expectation goes into overdrive, and it's a mistake they seem to have made ever since 1966, and especially the way Sky would talk about the next World Cup and the expectations. It just makes things impossibly difficult for somebody like Eddie Jones, who's in charge. But
funny enough, he hasn't almost put a dampener on it, has he? I mean, his stated aim, he couldn't. I mean, Sky Sports and every other outlet couldn't have asked for more hype. He came out and said, "We're going to win the World Cup. That's our aim."
Yeah, it's just ask. That's why I think there have been people lining up to gun him down. In terms of the way they play the game, I still think that they have a problem which dates back to Lancaster's time in charge, is the makeup of their back row, and that's where they were beaten yesterday by a guy. John, I see. Matt Williams was taking some credit for John Barkley's emergence.
He admitted he didn't play him.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he said. Okay. He said. I mean,
I think he was just by mentioning that though.
Saw him 18-19. Now I didn't play him.
But that's an ongoing problem for them in terms of getting quick ball. They love big guys, and that is, I suppose, that's part of the way English rugby has always been, that you can dominate opponents. But yesterday, I don't know, it reminded me of 1990 and of 2000, and they obviously got their attitude wrong, and it's reassuring in some respects that England, big old England, can still go to Murrayfield and not have their mental aspect right and be turned over, because none of us gave Scotland a chance before that game. So it's reassuring that sort of giant killing can still go on. And interestingly, we were talking about Ben Teo earlier on as well. I mean, in time-honoured fashion, there was somebody in the England camp saying something stupid, which no doubt was fed upon by the Scots beforehand. Ben Teo said he was asked about the history of a tournament, and as an Antipodean coming into it, he should have known better than to say it's completely irrelevant. It's fans who love to talk about past games, past championships. So maybe this is why they have media officers to stop things like that being said, because
I thought a lot was made of Teo's comments, and I guess we all got to fill space and talk about things. I thought, I mean, it's because, okay, Antipodean comes in, so it looks like a complete disrespect of the history and what it's all meant to be about, but there's tons. These guys are all young. Like, do we know for a fact that Stockdale was obsessed in watching rugby 10 years ago and has grown up on the tradition? Like, there are guys, Jamie Heaslip jumps to mind, who just don't buy into it, who think it is all a bit of faff and nonsense, and actually don't really care that this started in 1879, the Calcutta Cup, and the first 8 games were draws, and don't need to know that, and don't need to worry about what happened in 1990. It is irrelevant as far as Ben Teo or Jamie Heaslip or Jacob Stockdale are concerned, and that is not the reason they lost, and that's a slightly unfair thing to throw back at him.
And Shane McGrath is kind of, is criticising Ben Teo today, but I don't know if you ever came across Ben Teo when he was at Leinster during his 2 years.
Never spoke to him, no. There's the picture of him in the Irish jersey.
Yeah, no, well, that was an Instagram, I think, cheering Ireland on in the 2014 or 15 championship. That's just what Ben Teo's like. He just walks into an interview, and he is just refreshingly professional. He doesn't make it up. I remember asking him about playing for Ireland or England, because his mother's, I think he's English qualified through his mother, and obviously he was on the residency path here, but he left. And I said, I don't care, mate. Like, as long as they're paying me, they really.
He's a mercenary. Yeah.
Well, he's a professional. I mean,
okay. Actually, you're right. That's unfair.
He's a professional, and he's using the laws the same way as Ireland are using the laws, and everyone else is using the laws.
But we all agree the laws are. I mean, thank God they're being changed.
Well, they're being changed, and that's why you probably, if you want to be smarter about it, you can be. And he could have said, "Look, I respect the history. I don't know much about it," but that's not Ben's style, and that's the way it always was. And you probably get away with that more when you're Jamie Heaslip and you're from Nice, rather than a guy who's come over from having played rugby league for Samoa and come from Australia via New Zealand.
It's probably a bad combination, but I saw the comments, I saw them being talked about during the week, and I thought, okay, he was a bit maybe too forthright, but that is not the reason he mightn't have played well. That is not the reason England lost. People are different. I guarantee you, of the squads of 30 by 6, of the guts 200 players playing the Six Nations, there will be, because it's a cross section of society, a good percentage of them who don't give a damn about what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I think it's fair enough. So I thought I
prefer the history a little bit, a little bit. Yeah, you gotta, you'd hope that they appreciate what they're part of. That why these games are. And I think with most of the Irish players, you would get a sense that they all grew up watching this. Jacob Stockdale talked about how he grew up watching Conor Murray and Johnny Sexton. So if you want to feel old, there you go.
What would he have been in 2009? 11.
I worked out he was no, he was older than that. I think he was
21 now.
Himself and James Ryan and Andrew Porter were 8 and 9, I think, when Rory Best made his Six Nations debut.
God.
And we asked Rory about that on Friday. He was pretty impressed.
It's cruel mistress sport, and
I'm the same age as Rory Best, so I was feeling old as well.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything.
Okay, so a few other bits then away from the rugby. Ian Wright's interview with Peter O'Reilly in the Sunday Times.
No.
Is
not with Peter O'Reilly, with David Walsh.
Sorry,
Joe.
You did the cricket.
Been working too long.
Yeah. Well, so it's the standout interview I think across all the papers, and I didn't, I wouldn't have had massive hopes. I really like Ian Wright, but I just thought it would be a standard kind of Ian Wright talking about Arsenal playing in the Carabao Cup, where it's still 1-0 at half time, by the way, to Manchester City. But it is a really powerful read.
Yes, it is. He goes into I met David Walsh actually before the game yesterday, and he was talking about it. He wasn't talking about Wales Ireland. He was kind of excited about it still. He was buzzing from the time that he'd spent with Wrighty, and I like the way as well. And he actually quotes him verbatim. It sounds like Ian Wright. Nothing's been tidied up. And he had an incredibly tough upbringing and all sorts of knocks. It kind of reminds you of how resilience is one of the key ingredients for successful people and successful sports people. And he talks about his relationship, about meeting an old teacher who had taught him not only to read and to write, but also to believe in himself as a footballer. The bit you liked, I think, Rory, was the fact that he his relationship with journalists as well, though, isn't that?
Well, he name checks about 15 of them, which is very rare. It wasn't the only bit I liked. I'm not that self-serving, but Miguel makes it. Miguel Delaney, who I once marked for a Bray Wanderers game a couple of years ago, and now he's getting quoted by Ian Wright in the paper. But I think, God, you look at the guys that are playing for Ireland in the rugby yesterday, and these debutants, and they've all come through very good schools, very good upbringings, and the relationship he had with his mother is just quite troubling, actually. Some of the stuff that's in there is very serious stuff. I've been watching Ian Wright my whole life. I didn't know half of this stuff.
No.
I didn't read his autobiography. I get the sense that some of this has already been out there. I wouldn't have naturally gravitated towards Ian Wright's autobiography, but in an era where a lot of the football coverage is a little bit bland, this is very interesting stuff.
Well, just on his punditry, I'd never heard him talk about this before, and you've seen this transformation really in Ian Wright, where I quite like him now. I think he's very insightful. I really think he can read a game, and I enjoy when he's in Match of the Day. He's a nice balance, because he talks about how when he first started in punditry, and I can just imagine this actually, I really can, it makes you cringe, that producers were telling him, be funny and be lighthearted, be the jester, and he realised after a while this, he didn't quite enjoy doing it as much as it wasn't as good as they all seemed to think it was, and he complained publicly, which I don't remember, but it says here in the BBC he complained publicly, and the fallout was serious. He was told he would never work for the BBC again, and then didn't for another 9 years. Went around and did Be in Sports, Al Jazeera radio, and he said, I said to myself, the reason you were treated like a jester is because you were acting like a jester, and if I wanted to be taken seriously, I had to be serious, and that began with reading. And then that's where he mentions all the journalists he read. But he's
it's
really
the
applied
evolution
himself.
of a pundit, isn't it? I mean, which is, I suppose these players, you want the more recent guys because they're just out of the game and they have the insight, I suppose. But they're not necessarily ready for it. And he came to it via light entertainment. It says Dave Walsh writes about how he interviewed Denzel Washington, Elton John, many others.
Yeah.
So he was seen as a light entertainer who could do football punditry. And now he's actually a very good pundit, and he speaks very well about his kind of relationship with Arsene Wenger, and the watching him now, he says, is like watching an aging Muhammad Ali against Larry Holmes, or watching Brazil's Ronaldo when he got fat. You're watching the greats in their demise. The problem with Arsene is that there's no one in his corner and prepared to throw it in the towel, which is quite a nice but a little bit sad line for a guy who did probably so much for his career.
And right above that, he remembers hanging out with Wenger at the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, and he says, such a fascinating man to talk to. And this is a really amazing thing, because it's right before that Muhammad Ali analogy. He says, during one conversation with Arsene, he said to me that he accepts whatever I say, whatever criticism I make, he understands it comes from a place of love.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes you love Arsene Wenger again. He is an amazing man in so many ways. On the upbringing, I think it's worth reading. He grew up in a council estate in South London. It seems his mother, Nesta Wright, it says here, when Nesta Wright drank, she could not stop herself being mean-spirited, especially to her youngest son, in this case Ian. He never had a relationship with his stepdad, nor with his older brother Nicky, or stepsister Dion. 6 people in the family, 4 of whom seemed like the enemy. At 14 he quit school. One of the quotes from his mother, I should have had a termination, his mum used to tell him. At the time he wasn't sure what a termination was, but he imagined it couldn't be good. So it seems like his home life was hellish, actually.
To have amounted to what he amounted to, given that, is just incredible. And to be so upbeat, like, we don't know what he's like behind the scenes, but the impression David gives is that he's, as ebullient as he seems, and to have come through all of that and still be such a gregarious character, but also a brilliant footballer, which sometimes I think the cheeky chappy thing probably devalued for the records that he set and how brilliant he was as a footballer.
But for Thierry Henry, he's still Arsenal's all-time goal scorer.
Incredible stuff.
Have you ever seen that video where his old teacher surprised him?
I think I have, but I've seen so many YouTube videos I've forgotten about it until I read it here.
It's in one way it's very sad, really, because they have Ian Wright at a football stadium. There's a ruse where he's doing some kind of interview. He doesn't know anything about it. Mm-hmm. And so he's there doing his piece to camera, and they've arranged for his teacher, who, as Wright says, taught me to read and write, gave him, probably was his only source of self-confidence growing up, you get the impression. And Wright's talking to camera in the video, and he gets a tap on the shoulder. I can't remember. Oh yeah, they have the quote here. The teacher says to him, "Hello Ian, long time." And in the video you do see Wright, he's not sure initially, is this just some other person who's coming up to him because he's famous, or what's going on, I'm trying to do a TV interview. And then he seems to realise who it is, and he's like, I thought you were dead. And then I think it probably highlights that there's a deep level of hurt there, because Wright goes very quickly from what's a superficial initial, oh my god it's you, into just bawling, crying, and puts his hat over his face to cover his face, just starts bawling. And you think, oh, there's a level of trauma underneath the surface there, to go so quickly from, geez, I thought you were dead, I didn't know you were still around, to like bawling, crying. It never gets examined really in the video, it's not that kind of thing. But I now have after reading this piece, I have a deeper understanding as to maybe what this teacher did mean to a teenage Ian Wright.
There's I see David manages to get a story in at the end, which is
wondering who'd take that.
Well, yeah, it's interesting though that I think in the book apparently it goes into more detail about how Wright suffered rejection when he went into the England squad, first of all, specifically from Steve McMahon.
Nasty.
It was really nasty, apparently, yeah. So years later, when they're playing against each other, there's a 50-50 ball, and I suppose the upshot, if you like, is that Steve McMahon has to have his foreskin stitched, and years later, he meets McMahon, and McMahon says to him, "Righty, you caught me in the wrong place," but he's okay about it. "I apologise and wish him well for the rest of the season. After we retire, I meet him somewhere, and he's saying that every time he pees or has any form of arousal, he feels a little pain and thinks of me." And I'm thinking, ah man, that's sweet.
That's brilliant.
He had to get it in somewhere, so it was the outro.
Yeah, I mean, I could see Rory shifting uncomfortably. So that's really good. That's worth the read. That's the standard.
And the picture again, another really good portrait picture there.
Yeah, it's intimate, isn't it?
Brings you into it as well.
Yeah. Eamon Sweeney, you liked?
Yeah, actually, it kind of ties in. I hadn't made the link before, but even the fact that Ian Wright had lost contact with Mr. Pigeon, who had such a role in his upbringing. Eamon Sweeney writes about the Wigan win on Monday night and why it brought him back to the cliched magic of the cup. And sometimes, cliches are true, unfortunately, even though you kind of try and get away from them. But Eamon, it's a really good read.
The intro is good because he does acknowledge that he puts the magic of the cup in this piece, and he says, it's like Theresa May's strong and stable government mantra. It's like Nixon saying, "I am not a crook."
Yeah.
Magic of the cup, he understands, is now in that category.
But then he was there on Monday night, and he hates this idea of magic of the cup, and then something magical happens. Will Griggs, and it's just a really well constructed piece because he brings in different things as it goes on, and it's the value of a Sunday read where you have a bit of time to put it together, I think. And then he brings, he moves from what does this upset actually mean? He compares it to Leitrim beating Dublin in the Championship, except that could never happen because of points, which is a theory his father had, that you can't have a real shock in Gaelic games because you've got points in the game. Goals are much harder to score.
Well, I guess higher scoring games.
Yeah, but he goes into the elitism of English football and how he's seen journalists passionately defend Man United against the unreasonable demands of Marcus Rashford's coach, who says that they have got no, from a schoolboy team, that they get nothing from bringing this player through. They don't even get a bag of jerseys off United, even though they have this asset now of their who was produced by this club. And he then goes into that kind of Leitrim analogy, and finishes off bringing it full circle to the fact that, you know, the Premier League club fans in Ireland probably don't appreciate what Wigan fans went through on Monday night, because they only really follow the big guns, whereas he's a League of Ireland fan. Eamon's, you know, very well known as a Sligo fan, and the League of Ireland fan understands, because we know what it's like to be the wretched of the earth. And I'm a League of Ireland fan. I know exactly what that's like. And he then brings it back. Yeah, well,
is that how you feel?
If you go to Bowes enough over the course of a season, you feel pretty wretched in recent years. But he brings it back to Paul Cook then, because Paul Cook is the Wigan manager, and a couple of years ago he was the Sligo Rovers manager who guided them to 2 FAI Cups, a League Cup, and a runners-up spot in the league. You know, and then Paul Cook goes toe to toe with Guardiola on Monday night, and having covered the league when Paul Cook was manager, and seen him in action and see him exactly the same, but thriving at you know, he's not at the top level yet.
Was he confrontational with managers?
Oh, he was. Yeah, I mean, you would have seen him go toe to toe with Michael O'Neill, with Pat Fenlon, whenever.
Okay.
You know, when there was cause to, he always would present for interview with no voice. It was just that Paul Cook loses his voice over the course of every game, and he had this really strong Liverpudlian accent. He was a real character when he was here. He doesn't seem to have changed a huge amount, but he's still as successful as he goes up the ranks, and Eamon is backing him to that. You know, he'd be no surprise to see him in the Premier League. It's just a really nice piece. Really, you know, he brings in a lot of different strands. I just really enjoyed it. So yeah, it's one I'd recommend.
Yeah, he's a good piece of Andy Lee beneath that as well.
He does, yeah.
Just echoing, I think, how everybody feels about Andy Lee. Like, at one point he says, had Lee been prepared to engage in the kind of tawdry pre-fight theatrics so common in big-time boxing these days, he might have enjoyed a higher profile and bigger paydays. But if he'd done that, he wouldn't have been Andy Lee. That's worth a read too. And then a final point just to finish on. Peter, you made a point today in the Sunday Times I hadn't quite realised, that Ireland's chances of qualifying for the Cricket World Cup are slim. Is slim too negative a word?
That's the implication of the headline, actually, that's been put on the piece. I suppose what I'm talking about is the fact that Ireland are now, or have become regulars into the general sports fan. They're regulars at Cricket World Cup. That's where Irish cricket happens. Ireland have the famous wins. I think everybody remembers St. Patrick's Day 2007 when they beat Pakistan and Jamaica.
I think that's when that was the first time maybe the quote-unquote casual sports fan.
I think so.
Took an interest, yeah.
And then 4 years later, they beat England in Bengaluru, which really was a seismic victory. And then they beat the West Indies a couple of years ago in New Zealand. I think it was. But the ICC, the International Cricket Council, have decided that this next year's World Cup in England will be a 10-team affair,
as opposed to
14 for the last 2 tournaments. So that this tournament and the one in 2023, I think, are going to be contested by 10 teams. And this by an organisation which, you know, purports to globalise the game. So what it means is that a couple of test nations won't be at that World Cup. The ICC, I suppose the thrust of the piece is that the ICC are praying that the 2 teams to emerge from the qualifying tournament in Zimbabwe, which starts next Sunday, will be Afghanistan, because they're a fantastic story. They're the good news story, the only good positive thing to come out of that country recently. They're a real happening team with a massive following. It's the only sport really that counts in Afghanistan, and of course they want the West Indies to be at the World Cup, because they represent a whole slice of, a whole sort of an area with such a huge history in the game. They've won the World Cup twice, but they're struggling desperately now with competing sports and T20 and all that sort of thing. So Ireland, I suppose, if they do make it, it'll be a surprise, because they've got an ageing team, but they just happened to hit some form in the last couple of months. And they have a new coach who seems to have impressed the players.
What's his story, the new coach?
Well, his name's Graham Ford, and he has a lot of history. He's coached Sri Lanka, and he's coached his own native South Africa at one stage. He's a serious operator and sounds to be a type of a Schmidt character, a detail man, but he also has a very good support staff. So you've got guys like Ed Joyce, Niall O'Brien, coming towards the end of their career.
Might be one last hurrah.
This is their final fling.
What's the logic of the ICC? Because every other tournament, not least the World Cup, seems to be expanding.
It's as far as I can see, it's about having fewer slices to the pizza money or whatever, the financial pie, if you like, and that is decided by a couple of very powerful countries involved. India seem to be the most powerful country, or they are the most powerful country in cricketing politics.
Generally, more teams and more matches means more money. And even if there's more slices in the pizza, it's still more money. That's an interesting logic. And as you said, it's not exactly globalising the game. If Ireland aren't at that World Cup, it will barely register here.
Yeah, well,
I guess the fact is in England it might to some extent. But you take my point.
Yeah, but the TV companies, you feel, are probably saying this: we want the best teams on the television as often as possible. But it would be a fantastic achievement to get there, and it would be a fantastic achievement because it's the first real World Cup. Well, there was a T20 World Cup in England in 2009 where you had lots of cricket fans hopping over for the day. So that'll just be interesting to watch, starting next Sunday for the following 3 weeks, I think it is. And they will be playing against the likes of Zimbabwe, West Indies, Papua New Guinea, some of the smaller nations as well. But they're not expected to come through this time, which actually makes them more dangerous.
Okay. Gents, we're out of time. Thank you very much for both coming in, especially on a busy weekend. Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent and Peter Wright from the Sunday Times. Thank you. Short break. It's still Manchester City 1, Arsenal 0 now into the 51st minute at Wembley.
Off the Ball
on News Talk in association with Air. Don't miss live Allianz League's GAA action this month on the Air Sport Pack, the home of Irish sport.
Tech Talk with Jess Kelly.
Coming up this evening at 6, I'll be joined by the Chief Information Officer at the HSE to hear how technology is transforming our health service. The women of Ping Kong Studios will be in to talk about producing a virtual reality film, pushing the boundaries of animation and VR. We'll preview this year's Mobile World Congress, which kicks off on Monday, and of course answer your tech questions.
Tech Talk with Jess Kelly.
This evening from 6
on News Talk.